As you may have already heard, George R.R. Martin has been very displeased with the development of HBO's House of the Dragon. Yes, instead of taking the time to actually work on The Winds of Winter, Martin has been complaining a lot about Ryan Condal's work as a showrunner. Apparently, the author has thoughts on the depiction of Blood and Cheese, Maelor the Missing, Helena's eventual fate, and plenty of other things. But while that isn't exactly all that surprising, given how Martin seems to be a curmudgeonly old man as it is, I was genuinely surprised to see how many other people were also disappointed with Season 2 of House of the Dragon, especially in how it concluded. And since I never shared my thoughts on the Season 2 finale, I thought it would be a good time to do that now. Admittedly, I didn't care for how the episode began, and proceeded to spend a lot of time with Tywin Lannister and the Triarchy. I get that these characters will probably be involved with more important plot points down the line, so you want to establish their relationships now, but the tone of these scenes just felt totally wrong to me. I mean, I don't mind seeing mud wrestling in Game of Thrones. I actually don't mind the mud wrestling scene at all. But this is a season finale, so I would expect the stakes to feel a little bit higher than a mud wrestle. And I get that the showrunners were just trying to provide some levity in an episode that was pretty serious otherwise, but since the story didn't build up to anything that felt significant, all of these scenes felt like a complete waste of time. Every second that was spent on this plot point is time that could have been spent developing something else that could have been important. And I think this is the biggest issue that people have with Season 2 as a whole. It doesn't build up to a satisfying conclusion on its own. I mean, considering the huge success of Game of Thrones, I assume that HBO wanted to have as many seasons of House of the Dragon as possible. But by making this specific story 4 seasons long, the story has become way too stretched out. So while Season 1 moved at a surprisingly rapid pace, Season 2 moves at a frustratingly slow pace, because the showrunners are trying to stretch out the story as far as they possibly can. And as a result, Season 2 just feels like one big setup to Season 3. Meaning that the season feels like nothing more than a commercial for bigger things that have yet to come. It exists solely to bridge the gap between seasons 1 and 3, and that is admittedly infuriating. It can be hard to enjoy something in its own right when its sole purpose is to set up something else entirely. But even with all of that being said, I would argue that Season 2 of House of the Dragon is still really damn good. Just because the finale was a bit underwhelming doesn't mean that the overall season was a bad one. This is a very well-written, well-directed, and powerfully acted show, and those are George R.R. Martin's own words. I mean, would I have liked the finale to include one major action sequence or something else of equal importance? Obviously, but the lack of action doesn't take away from how much I enjoyed the writing, or the acting, or the directing, or the dialogue, or the production design, or the music, or any other aspect of the show. I still very much enjoyed the storytelling and the world building here. So my complaints with the finale aren't necessarily aimed at the writers or the showrunners, because I actually think the creative team did a pretty solid job with the stipulations that they were given. Instead, my problem lies with whatever corporate committee makes the business decisions at HBO and Warner Brothers. But getting back to the actual episode itself, Aemon destroys an entire town because he's a rage-fueled crybaby who demanded his own sister fly into battle just so he can maybe win a war. Larys decides to take Aegon out of King's Landing, claiming that they'll retake the throne once the war is over, which is actually a pretty smart move to make, all things considered. Ulf is a boorish asshole who doesn't understand the intricacies of dragon riding royal life, much to the chagrin of Jace, of course. Rhaena finally finds the wild dragon in the Eyrie, though we never actually get to see her bond with it. Criston Cole admits that he regrets being part of the war, which is like, boo fucking who, my guy? You basically started this war in the first place. Daemon has a vision of the future, where he sees the army of the dead and the birth of Daenerys Targaryen. Many people think that this vision confirms that Dany is actually the prince who was promised, but I personally have a hard time believing that theory, because plenty of people also thought that this guy was the Night King for some reason, when he is very clearly just a regular White Walker. Daemon ends his time at Harrenhal by swearing fealty to Rhaenyra, thus completing the exact same character arc that he had in the first season of the show. And Alicent secretly travels to Dragonstone, offering to surrender King's Landing to Rhaenyra in exchange for her and her family's safety. Which means that these two characters have gone on a complete roller coaster in terms of where they stand with waging war. But Rhaenyra insists that Aegon must die in order to secure her rightful place on the throne, meaning that she's finally ready to actually commit to this war. And it only took her an entire season of television to come to that conclusion. Also, how the fuck do these characters just keep sneaking around everywhere? I get that the writers wanted to have some closure on Alicent's part of the story, since she's basically not involved with anything that goes on moving forward, but this is the third time that someone has just snuck into a heavily guarded place. Both the Blacks and the Greens need to think about hiring new security, especially if Otto Hightower can just be held captive in a cell somewhere without any single ounce of context. But the episode ends with armies in the Reach, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, and the Seas because everyone has been mobilized for war. It just sucks that we as an audience have to wait for season 3 in order to see said war. And waiting is hard, I get it, but I have faith in Ryan Condal's ability to craft a satisfying story. So hopefully when season 3 finally rolls around, it'll turn out to be an action-packed season that is filled with plenty of payoffs. Only time will tell, but I'm still excited to see where this story will go. And since I am still excited for season 3, I think that proves that I did enjoy season 2 overall. Yes, there were a lot of lulls or excruciatingly slow plot developments, but there were also plenty of incredible highs and memorable moments as well. So, with all of that being considered, I would say that Season 2 of House of the Dragon would definitely get a recommendation from me. And I don't care if George R.R. Martin has issues with the series, because I never read any of his books, and I don't exactly plan on it either. No offense to George, I just don't really like to read in the first place. Thankfully, these shows do stand really well on their own 2 feet, so maybe George should worry less about how other people adapt his work and worry more about finishing his own work. But I appreciate anyone who stuck around to hear my full thoughts on this show, so as always, thanks for watching.